Hi grade 11s, this is JP. This is just a very short video on quadrants. I've covered it, some of it in the revision video that you watched yesterday. But yeah, so let's just go through all of it. So what we've got the four quadrants, of course. Quadrant 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember it starts as 0 and we're going in an anti-clockwise direction. So if an angle is between 0 and 90, that is in quadrant 1, right? So and then in quadrant 2, we've got an angle between 90 and 180 degrees. And in quadrant 3, we've got an angle between 180 and 270. And then between 270 and 360 in quadrant 4, right? So if I give you an angle of 400 degrees, then I actually went around like 360 plus 40. So I'm in quadrant 1 again. So when I'm talking about these angles, that's being formed, so in quadrant 1, of course, it will just be the angle. So for example, if theta is 30, well, that is in quadrant 1. If theta is 150, that would mean this, in this little triangle there, that angle would be 30 degrees, right? 180 minus 30 is equal to 150. If it is 210 degrees, we're in quadrant 3, so that means that angle there is 30. Does that make sense? So your reference angle will always be between 0 and 90. And then in quadrant 4, where there's a theta missing, you have then 360 minus the angle. So in other words, if that was, so for example, 330, then you would go 360 minus 30 degrees. So again, theta is an acute angle. And then, so remember in the first quadrant, all those ratios are positive, sine, cos, and tan. In quadrant 2, only the sines ratio is positive. Cos and tan, they are both negative. Third quadrant, tan is positive, but sine and cos's ratios, they are negative. And then lastly, cos is positive, so the ratios of sine and tan are negative. I covered that in the previous video. So just quickly, how would you know in which quadrant an angle would be? So you will look at the angle, so 250 degrees. So 250 degrees is greater than 90, it's greater than 180, it's not greater than 270. So it's between 180 and 270 degrees. So that would mean that is going to be quadrant 3. The next one, 280 degrees. 280 degrees is greater than 270, but it is not greater than 360. So that will be between 270 and 360, so that would be in quadrant 4. Next up is 100 degrees. That is, it's slightly bigger than 90, 10 degrees bigger than 90, but it's not bigger than 180, so it's in this quadrant, so that would be quadrant 2. And then 500, that's an interesting one. So what happens? So 90, 180, 270, 360, it went around once. 360 plus by 90 is equal to 450, and then so 450 would be, so it went around once and then plus 90, but it's bigger than 450, so it's another 50 degrees there. So in other words, it will be in quadrant 2, right? So in other words, a quick way to do it is what you just do is you look at if an angle is greater than 360, you just keep on subtracting 360 from it. So 500 degrees minus 360 is going to equal to 140 degrees. And we would use situate or locate 140 degrees. That would be in quadrant 2, right? So that's just another way to do it. Okay, so what happens if we've got a negative angle like minus 40? A positive angle, I told you, is going in an anti-clockwise direction. So a negative angle must go in a clockwise direction. So an angle of minus 40 means like you're at 0 and you're going in minus 40 degrees in a clockwise direction. So that would be minus 90, minus 180, minus 270, and minus 360. You follow? So what do we have then? So if it's minus 40, it's in that last quadrant, so that would be in quadrant 4. All right. And then minus 120, that means you're going to go further than that, further than just the first quadrant. So that's minus 90. So minus 120 is between then minus 90 and minus 180. So that would be in quadrant 3. So another way to do this, of course, is you just keep on adding 360 to a negative angle. So what is minus 40 degrees plus by 360 degrees? That is equal to 320 degrees. And where would I locate 320 degrees? Of course, in quadrant 4. The same with the minus 120. Minus 120 plus by 360 degrees is going to equal to 240 degrees. Where would I locate 240 degrees? Well, it's between 180 and 270. So that's in quadrant 3. And then lastly, 740, what does that mean? It means it went around once, 360, went around twice, 720, plus another 20 degrees. So that is in quadrant 1. So you can minus 360 twice from it. So then it's just a 20-degree angle, and that's in quadrant 1. Okay, so next we're going to look at the sign of the ratios. So if I ask you what is sine of 250, I'm just interested whether the ratio will be positive or negative here, right? So how would we do that? Well, first of all, we just saw now that 250 degrees is in the third quadrant. So we're looking at a sine of an angle in the third quadrant, okay? What would which function is positive? We'll have a positive ratio in the third quadrant, only tan, right? Sine and cos, all those ratios of sine and cos will be negative. So that would mean that sine of 250 degrees in the third quadrant, and sine will have a negative ratio. All right, next up, sine 280 degrees. Sine 280 degrees, which quadrant is that in? So that is in the fourth quadrant. So would sine be positive or negative in the fourth quadrant? Only cos is positive in the fourth quadrant. Sine will be negative. So it will also have a negative ratio. Hopefully that makes sense. Sine of 100. Sine of 100 is where can you locate sine of 100? In the second quadrant. What happens is in the second quadrant, sine's got a positive ratio, cos and tan, they are negative. So that would mean sine of 100 will have a positive ratio. Alright, sine of 500, remember what 500 is? That is when you went around once, so 360, and then plus another 140 degrees. So we're in the second quadrant again. So sine of 500 will have also a positive ratio. Sine of minus 40 is in the fourth quadrant. Who will be positive in the fourth quadrant? Only cos, baby. So sine and tan will be negative there. So sine of minus 40 will have a negative ratio. So negative ratio. Right, sine of minus 120. Sine of minus 120 is, remember, it's in the third quadrant. Who's positive in the third quadrant? Ooh, tan. It's positive. It's cos and sine. They've got negative ratios there. So that would be a negative ratio. Okay, and lastly, sine of 740. That, of course, just means that you went around once, 360, 720, plus another 20 degrees. So in the first quadrant, and everyone is positive in the first quadrant. So it will have a positive ratio. Next, we're going to play a game. In which quadrant are you in? Okay, first contender there is sine theta, which is greater than 0, and the second contender is tan theta, that is greater than 0. Okay, so let's have a look. So sine theta is, okay, so that's 0, 90, 180, 270, and again 360. Where's sine theta positive? Sine theta is positive. That's quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4. Sine theta is positive in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 1. Everyone's positive in quadrant 1. Sine is positive in quadrant 2. Okay, so we've just dealt with sine theta greater than 0. Now let's look at tan theta greater than 0. Where is tan positive? Tan is also positive in the first quadrant. Everyone is positive in the first quadrant. And tan is also positive in quadrant 3. So the one with the most sticks, yes, he will need front line. So therefore, that would be the most sticks here. sine is positive in quadrant 1 and also tan is positive in quadrant 1. So where would we find sine positive and cos and tan positive? In quadrant 1. All right, let's look at another one. So for example, I ask you, where's cos theta negative and where is tan negative? Okay, so where's cos with the ratio of cos negative and the ratio of tan negative? So let's have a look. So again, we've got quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. Remember that is where it's 0, 90, 180, 270 and 360. Okay, so remember, and you remember it however you want to, cast or I don't know. So here we go. So we want to look firstly where cos theta has got a negative ratio. Cos has got a negative ratio in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Where would tan theta have a negative ratio? Tan theta would have a negative ratio in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. So which one's got the most ticks? Quadrant 2 is the winner. So this one, which quadrant am I finding myself in? In quadrant 2.